Transportation Committee meeting for Wednesday, April the 10th, 2013. And as you know, the members of the committee are Paul Koretz, Bernard Parks, Tom Labange, Jose Huizar, and yours truly, Bill Rosendahl, as chair. We have a long agenda, colleagues, and a lot to cover. But if we do it with an open spirit, we'll get it all done, and everybody will leave the room feeling the democracy at its best. Okay? That's what we're all about here. Colleagues, I just want to see if we feel strongly, there's three of us here, so that is enough to start the meeting on consent. I'm told two more folks are going to show up, or not?
Yes.
They are. Okay. Here comes Mr. Parks. And then we're waiting to hear or see Mr. Huizar. Is that how that's going? Does he have a deputy here at this point?
Have the deputy vote for him instead.
Is he en route? Great. Mr. Parks, welcome. I'm doing great. Well, I'm just going to put it out there, but I'll wait for him if he's going to walk in the door before we do it. I want to obviously be clear about it. It has been suggested that on consent, we put items 2, 3, 4, and 12. So if anybody wants to talk about it, we will not move it until Mr. Huizar walks in. So it could either be unanimous or we could have a healthy discussion if there's a need for that among my colleagues. And then if I could just start with Mr. Labange, if that's okay.
Okay.
You're okay with those five? Mr. Koretz?
Looks fine to me.
It looks fine to you. Mr. Parks?
It's fine. I have a couple others you can add, too.
You have a couple of others you want to put on consent?
I have 7, 8, and 9.
7, 8, and 9. When you're on a roll, right? 7, 8, and 9. Well, what we have for action is approve as amended on number 7. 8, I'm being suggested to approve it. 9, it says approved as amended. Do we got all that done, or we have to amend
I think we have some discussion on some of these. I wouldn't recommend them for...
Okay, wait a minute. 7 and 8, Mr. Koretz has questions. Okay, so that will not go on consent. When Mr. Park said he could do number 9 too, approve as amended, but we haven't gone through that process. Is that right, Maria?
Right, we have some amendments and
We need to
things.
go through that.
The department needs a presentation on that one.
Quick. Now we're joined by Mr. Jose Huizar. We have 5 members of the committee here. And so we're all here. And Mr. Huizar, it's been suggested, and there were no issues with any colleagues, that 2, 3, 4, and 12, unless I misheard anybody about 12, would go on consent. Is that fine with you? It seems to be fine with everyone. So unanimously, folks, on consent is items 2, 3, 4, and 12. Thank you. Okay, the next item to discuss will be what?
Well, item number 1, I would recommend you receive and file in as much as the commission, the mayor has submitted a withdrawal for the commission appointment. That's for the communication from the mayor relative to the appointment of Mr. Nathaniel Gale to the Board of Tax Cap Commissioners. So I'd suggest to receive and file that one.
So we just receive and file. Anybody have any problem with that? This was obviously a mayor's appointment that he has withdrawn. He has the prerogative to do whatever he wants to do with those appointments. Anybody want to say anything about it? So be it. Receive and file. Okay, so we got that done. And 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, what's next?
That would bring us to item number 5, which is a Rosendahl-Koretz motion requesting that LA County MTA report relative to the proposed Measure R traffic relief and rail expansion ordinance and expenditure plan amendments that would expedite all regional Measure R projects. MTA staff is here, and they also have a presentation that's before you.
Good, and I might say, colleagues, when we finish going through this, it is a note and file, but we do need to get our priorities straight and understand where we're coming from. Go for it.
Thank you, council members and chairman. I'm David Yale, Executive Officer for Regional Programming at the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and it's good to see several familiar faces here today. The Measure R Project Finance Acceleration Plan that I'm presenting, it looks like this on your desk. We are still pursuing a way to accelerate our Measure R program, 12 transit projects and 16 highway projects. As you know, Measure J, our last effort to accelerate, barely lost at the polls, 66.11%. This is a strategy that we're working on that would not involve Measure J, and I'd be happy to go through that presentation. Our sales tax forecast has changed since our last long-range plan and is slightly down. Our interest cost assumptions are also down, so that more than compensates for any loss we've had in our forecasted sales tax for our long-range plan. The sales tax is key because we have Prop A, Prop C, Measure R, and TDA working for transportation in Los Angeles County.
Right?
That's right.
Okay, do you have copies for the public at all?
Yeah, I left them on the table in the
Does
back.
everybody have access to this in the room that wants access to it? Okay, great.
There are significant benefits. I'm on slide 5 now. There are significant benefits to accelerating our program, creating jobs, eliminating emissions, reducing vehicle miles traveled, increasing transit boardings, and relieving congestion. The transit side is the focus I want to take here with the City of LA. Almost all Measure R projects in the city are transit. The first column in slide 6 shows the projects countywide and the assumed funding and opening year for Measure R. The assumed funding and opening year for the acceleration plan is also shown, and as you can see, we believe we can save some funding by delivering these faster and also get the benefits of the mobility improvements. The second, slide 7, shows you the accelerated projects in green. So you can see segment 2 of the subway between La Cienega and Century City, and between Century City and the VA hospital in Westwood are accelerated, as are the South Bay Green Line, the East Side extension of the existing Gold Line to the east side, the Airport Metro Connector, and the Sepulveda Path Transit Corridor, and finally the West Santa Ana Branch. So if we can get these loans and full funding grant agreements that we are seeking for our program, we can accelerate these projects in a significant way. On the highway side, I've shown you the same table here. I'm not going to go through the detail of that. And on slide 10 is a summary of our planned borrowing strategy. This gets a little technical, inside baseball at Metro, about old measures that were to prohibit the use of Prop A and C for subways. But we think there's a way to work around those requirements and deliver the subway projects, the regional connector and the West Side subway, in an accelerated way, and all the other 12 transit projects and substantial portions of the highway program. The method we propose to use is to put Prop A and C, our sales taxes that do not have a sunset, in where Measure J would have stood in before. Remember, Measure J was an extension from 2040 out to 2069. This would have A and C step in where those payments once were and enable us to borrow enough to be able to do the program. The actual construction cash flow is shown on slide 13, and the way we would finance it is also shown. We expect over time that cash flow would shift out. Often the engineers give us a fairly optimistic view of how fast they're going to spend their money. There are often problems they didn't anticipate. So if it does slip out, we would expect to have to borrow less, making this still even more viable. There are several slides here that I think maybe get too technical, but I can run through them really quickly. I think we have sufficient time. a normal borrowing program the interest rates would rise as you borrowed more money. Here we are interrupting that flow with a federal policy called America Fast Forward, where we are assuming TIFIA, a federal loan program that we got in the federal reauthorization, MAP 21, and we are assuming some new transportation bonds that would be interest-free. Without those interest-free bonds, this program still works. There would be a requirement that some projects be deferred a little bit from using the sequence of the long-range transportation plan. There's a lot of detail there. The next slides, 16 and 17, show you the service hours we'd be adding for transit on the rail side in Los Angeles County if we do this. You can see between the black line on that and the top of the bars, there's about 750,000 rail service hours. So it's a significant improvement in the amount of rail, which are premium trips that travelers use for longer and faster travel times. The operating cost is shown on 17 there. I want to end with the actions we need to accomplish the plan. First, we need to amend Measure R. This amendment is fairly simple. We need to change a few dates in the Measure R expenditure plan. Those dates now prohibit some projects from getting funds in the first decade. Instead, they would have to wait until the second or even third decade of the plan. This amendment would enable those projects to access their funds faster. Once we notice the amendment, which is expected to occur in April, we must wait 30 days. So we are expecting to take the actual formal amendment action in June. It requires a 2/3 vote of the Metro Board. We would then amend our TIFIA loan request before the federal government and submit what is called a master credit agreement request for the non-subway and highway projects in the program. Once all those Metro actions were taken, we would then need federal action on our full funding grant agreements. We got good news today in the President's budget. He added $65 million each for the regional connector and the subway for a total of $130 million. This is really the camel's nose for our full funding grant agreement. So that's a very good news that we got today. They would have to approve the TIFIA loans and the master credit agreements, and we would continue to seek the America Fast Forward bonds, which form about 10% of this, that would be interest-free bonds through Congress. If that piece doesn't happen, I think this is still a go, though a little bit stretched out further. The actual amendment language is shown on slide 19. This language makes the changes to the expenditure plan conditional on the federal actions we need, the approval of the master credit agreements and TIFIA loans and the full funding grant agreements. It also makes, in the ordinance, the sequence of the long-range plan, what we would use to determine the priority for projects, which is something I think everybody wanted to see so that there was no leapfrogging here as we accelerated projects. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. And
Thank you. Just a little back in history. This Proposition R passed what year?
2008, in November.
And then prior to that, when was the last countywide measure? Was that Kenneth Hahn's measure for?
It was Prop C in 1990.
Was that Kenneth Hahn's one that got the?
I'm trying to remember. I was actually there when that. Whether he was still. Was he still on the Board of Soups? I think so.
Prior to that was when?
Then 1980, Proposition A,
which gave us
the Long Beach Blue Line and
that was Kenneth Hahn's one.
Yeah. Okay.
So Proposition A.
Yeah.
So on that, and then prior to that, there was the only loss that the Los Angeles Times did not endorse in 1968, which we would have been on par with what the Bay Area Rapid Transit is today. It was a measure.
Yeah, we're catching up to them. I don't know if you know that.
I think the most important thing, though, this is all good, and you use some. I know you're talking to a government body here, but I think we got to convince the people that what we're doing. And I also do think that between now and 1939 or 2039, there'll be some other proposition. Information to the people on our progress is very important. Do you have an annual progress report on this?
We actually report to our board every month on this.
But I mean to the public. The board is one thing, but to the public, do you do anything?
I don't know off the top of my head. Do you know whether we, I don't think
Well,
so.
I think we're subject to an audit, measure our...
That's all right.
We
but
certainly
sometimes-
have the information to do it.
I got it. Here's what I want you
Good
to do,
idea.
Mr. Chair, if I could here. Ask, I support this, but I would also request that the MTA annually, like Water and Power does a water quality report annually, pick up a year in, a month in the year that you would give an annual report on the progress, so the public knows the progress of this investment.
That's a good
And the
idea.
investment is very important, so that's a friendly amendment or a second to that or whatever. Okay.
Second it, or we'll just include it in the note file? Okay, anything else from anybody else?
Well, I'll do a separate motion, Maria, on this, just so we could bring it up, and maybe you could wave it through
Sure.
at the time, just so that annual reports are important to the people, not just to the bodies or the auditors or all that, but to the people, so they know this investment, and they see that the investment is being made. We do see a range of improvements. I think the most impressive improvement recently has been the Expo line, which has connected much of the region to the main system. And I also know this, Mr. Chair, just for the note, you could come to Los Angeles, and you could stay in a corridor from downtown through Hollywood to the Valley, or the Red Line, and experience, whether it's Hollywood, Universal City, the many beautiful museums at Exposition Park, the observatory we got to get better transit to, but and then downtown, LA Live, all without having a car. So that's a great improvement, and plus get to Pasadena or the East Side. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are we all clear about that, and how this amendment will be reached, and how we will note and file this? Maria?
Receive and file?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that is a friendly, supportive motion. I want
Well, I'm going to do a separate motion because I want to make a big point out of it.
Yeah, he wants it.
Later.
We'll do that.
All right, we'll do it separately.
Okay, but
Thank you.
good.
So receive and file.
Got this going.
Note and
Okay.
Note
All
and
right.
file, note and file.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we appreciate
Thank you. Say
that.
hi to Art Leahy.
I will do that.
What was the bus he drove when he first started? The number 31, the 31 on Los Feliz.
You grew
Yeah.
up, yeah. You grew up in this field.
Okay, Mr. Weezer wants us to do 7 and 8, because he obviously has to go on to another meeting, and I'm very...
8 and 9. 8 and 9.
8 and 9.
Oh, 8 and 9, okay. But right before we do that, can we at least get the concept of which ones we're going to use first, or what the strategy is going to be, Paul, that we've been talking about, having that conversation, or should we wait?
On which, are we taking 8 and 9? Should it?
That's right.
Okay, let me read 8 and 9. They're related. Number 8 is the City Attorney Report and Ordinance amending Section 85.04 of Chapter 8 of the LAMC to authorize LADOT to establish bicycle infrastructure zones to provide facilities for the parking of bicycles and amenities for a bike-sharing operation upon public streets in the city. Item number 9 is an LADOT report relative to establishing regulatory requirements for installing bicycle sharing infrastructure in the public right-of-way and requesting authority to hire 2 project assistants to administer the bike-sharing program.
Good. Do you want to speak about it? Off the
Sure.
top, or have the discussion go?
Let's have the discussion go. We could have the staff come up, give a
Come on up, let's do
presentation.
this. Let's get it going. Let's lay it all out, what we're talking about with 8 and 9.
Afternoon, council members. Michelle Malroy, Department of Transportation, Senior Bicycle Coordinator. Item 8 is an update to an existing ordinance to include bicycle kiosks as well as bicycle corrals in the DOT's authority to establish bike parking zones. I think City Attorney Michael Nagel may want to, Deputy City Attorney Michael Nagel may want to report on that because he has prepared the language for the new ordinance. Or maybe
You're
not.
up, Michael.
Or we can move forward, and item number 9 is specifically bicycle sharing and the establishment of the bicycle sharing permitting process within the city. So the new ordinance under item number 8 is a revision of the old ordinance, would give DOT the authority to, in addition to establishing bicycle parking zones, which the department has had in its purview for the last 30 or 40 years. It actually changes the language to officially include bicycle kiosks and bicycle sharing. The language before you prepared by the Deputy City Attorney would give DOT the authority to do that through an update to the LAMC.
I don't want to be confused, but report number 6 says, CAO report relative to establish and measure our local return programming priorities. There's a difference on one item 6 there?
On 8 and 9.
Recommendation number 6?
So item 6 is Measure R. Item 5 was Measure R. I think one was a report from MTA, the other is a report from...
I think the confusion is recommendation number 6 on item number 9 is what.
That's the confusion
Oh,
I have.
okay.
There's some discussion that could be bifurcated, Mr. Rosendahl,
Yeah.
so that we could have a discussion on that separately as to the budgetary impacts.
Yeah, I would recommend, our office would recommend that we receive and file that recommendation inasmuch as the mayor's proposed budget is going to be coming out in just a few days, and we can deal with that through the budget.
That's
Okay,
item, which one?
But does
That's
that,
recommendation number 6 on item 9.
but does that mean that this item would go forward unfunded? And I know Mr. Bernard Parks would have something to say about that, if it does.
No, we can't.
Does that mean this item would go forward unfunded?
That would be a question for the department in terms of how they would still implement. I understand they can still do it with the resources they have, and we would deal again with the positions just in a few weeks.
Hi, Jaime De La Vega, DOT.
Great.
Our recommendation was to provide adequate staffing for contract management and oversight. However, in light of the anticipated schedule for bike sharing, I think during the budget deliberations, we can handle the workload with our current staffing, and then we should have that discussion on staffing during the budget.
Which
I think is the direction you want to go.
With your current staff, you can handle this with your current staff?
Yeah, for the next couple of months
You're not
as we
asking for
ramp up.
additional staff right now? Okay, then it's manageable, okay.
You okay with that?
Thank you. Yes,
Parks.
absolutely. And
Mr. Parks is okay with it, too. Ms. Labange?
I want to know have you met with the Department of Disability?
We have, actually.
And what do they say?
We met with them with the issues regarding bike share and how we move forward.
No, the right-of-way, the space, the mobility, and the public space. Have you met with them on that issue?
Yes, we have. They brought up a number of issues which we've addressed through the bike share and we will address through the citing. We're not...
Do you have a written report?
We do not have a written report. We did have a
If
meeting.
you have it before it comes to council, have it written, because I think there's one challenge that we have, is all of a sudden, we sometimes forget those who may not be like you or I. They have mobility challenges, and we are making the sidewalks much narrower from the planning side, where we're trying to make more cafes, from the importance of having infrastructure to meet the needs of cycling.
I think we anticipate that many of these will be located in the street, much like a bicycle corral, that we are looking at very few of them on the public sidewalks, although the next process, the next phase of the permitting process allows them to bring them to DOT for our review and citing, and ADA would be one of the considerations.
Would they still go to the Bureau of Engineering?
They go to the Bureau, well, let me
Would they
talk.
still go to the Bureau of Engineering in this motion?
They do. They go to
It
the
will
Bureau.
still go to the Bureau of Engineering?
Yes.
So it's 2 steps. I thought you were trying to do 1 step, Jaime.
Yeah, we're going to have one step with cooperation with another department, which is step 1B. That's still one step. No, the issue, parts of one step. Just, Councilman, on the issue of ADA compliance, we're 100% going to comply with ADA, spacing requirements. We would never approve any sort of bike infrastructure that conflicted with ADA, and if the council wanted to make that more clear, I think you could amend our staff recommendation to direct us to make that an explicit criteria.
I just
in the
think that's
permitting
the
process. We're going to do it anyways, but if that
All right,
is
I
important, we
request
can
they
do that.
direct that they get concurrence with the Department of Disability to make sure it meets all the goals it needs. And also,
Comment on what he just said. A wheelchair should be part of the process and the package for people with disabilities, if that's what they need in this city, getting around, and other places. That was a suggestion, Mr. Labange, from you, which I thought was right on.
well, that's okay. Surprisingly enough, and we're going to have action too, I asked for a wheelchair today for one of our guests.
Yeah.
We don't have a wheelchair, but I'm going to ask Jerry Miller to have some wheelchairs
Yeah.
in there and our security for people sometimes. The next
Councilmember?
question I wanted to ask,
Before you move on, Councilmember, if you would look to the the City of Los Angeles bicycle vendor checklist in your package. It has the permit package for bike share in the City of Los Angeles. On page 2 of the package, it calls out very specific things that we will ask from the vendor. Number 3 bullet under bike share providers must agree to the following requirements per an MOU. Number 3 of the bullet, it says comply with Disabilities Act, ADA requirements, including but not limited to Title II and Title III. That was specifically provided.
I got it, but I want to make sure your department works, because the operator is going to come in, and you want to make it smooth for them, and if you're working together, that's all.
We are, and again, the Department of Disabilities has been very clear that these are the 2 titles that the vendor will be required to adhere to.
All right, the next quick question, street services and street cleaning, any infrastructure you put in the street doesn't impede the sweeper. 85% of all debris is within a foot of the curb, so how do we handle that?
So there's an entire section on maintenance in the MOU. The way that this program will work is essentially the vendor will come to LADOT with the package and execute an MOU with the Department of Transportation. Once the department has agreed to the MOU and agreed to the kiosk locations, they will go to the Bureau of Engineering and pull an A permit for the construction in the public right-of-way, essentially giving them the authority to put these stakes in the ground to affix the bicycle kiosks at that point. So within the draft MOU that the department will execute with the vendor, we have a section on maintenance, and we require them to do Covenant 2.2 on page 3 of the document requires the vendor to keep the bike share vendor shall at all time at its sole cost maintain the bike share kiosk in good, safe, clean, secure, and sanitary condition. And we actually are amending a little bit of the language to define the space, and I'll get back to the bullets that we want to amend, but we require them to keep that space clean and do all the work. And we have met with Bureau of Street Services and Bureau of Engineering pretty extensively on this process as we've gone through it.
Well, I know, but we've always had a problem on the river bikeway, maintenance, wreck-it parks. Now we got a contractor. I know that was your big push as a champion of that. So I just want to make sure that's covered with
It's covered. If they don't do it, we have the authority to yank their stuff out the ground.
Okay. And last question, when is it time to reinstitute licensing for bicycles? Because I know you were here before and we retracted that.
We did.
But now with the number coming, you know, I think if we are trying to be what we envision to be, and again, I compliment you, Mr. Rosendahl, when will you want to come back? Let me ask Jaime, because you're the general manager, because Michelle did speak about the administrative challenge. It used to be in the police department, whatever. But I think if we want to be what you want to be, you have to have some process. And I don't know how many bikes, bikes are very expensive now, et cetera.
If I could, Councilman, I'd actually defer to Michelle.
Okay, Michelle.
So bicycle licensing is a provision in the California Vehicle Code that gives local municipalities the authority to establish a bicycle licensing program in the city. It's a very old ordinance, and very few cities actually have this provision, which is why we actually recommended revocation. 2 years ago, I believe it's 2 now, the years are going pretty quickly now, the city chose to disband the program for 2 reasons. First, because many cities who are bike-friendly no longer do this, and B, because it's very difficult to maintain the database within the police department. So if you chose at any time to introduce a motion to reintroduce bicycle licensing in the city, you could do that at any time, and the council would discuss it. We could bring all the issues to the table for and
Well,
against.
I just think, I don't know how the members feel, if we're growing in the direction, I think there should be some licensing. If a lot of people ride, and more people are riding, identification is key, and emergency
let me
sense here.
explain.
Because I really believe, Michelle, now is the time, because there's been so much momentum to look at this. So, and maybe it's not on this issue here, but that we look at it separately, and you come back in 180 days or whatever, work with the Los Angeles County Bike Coalition and other organizations to see if there's a value to this. Plus, the horses pay a fee for a license, and that goes directly into horse and equestrian improvements. So I'm just thinking, if you're looking to get a licensing for the proper administrative, there's a potential opportunity to be able to do more for bikes on that?
So the California Vehicle Code has a cap on the amount that we can charge for bicycle licensing. I believe the cap is $6 at one point.
I understand that. Maybe they could change it. I don't need an explanation now. I just want to bring it up since you're all here, and this is an important issue.
Councilmember, when you include the motion, please include LAPD. It's their
Write
requirement
the
to
motion
maintain.
for me. Write the motion for me.
Okay.
That'll be good. And Maria will then
Yeah. I'll
buff it
write
up.
and send it to Maria.
Thanks a lot, Michelle.
Okay.
Buff it up, is that what she's saying?
Well,
Very good, no, I get you. Look, I have no problem in 180 days to do it, because I ain't going to be around for that, but that's okay. Mr. Koretz.
I was just wondering if we've had any ongoing dialogue with other West Side cities that are looking at undertaking a similar program.
We have.
Is there any way to make these two programs interact, or to see if they can attach themselves to our program, or some way to make that work more effectively?
We've had a number of discussions with the West Side COG, the city of Santa Monica, the cities of Culver City, and through the West Side COG, the city of West Hollywood, who are all moving forward on projects. In addition, we've had a conversation with Metro, several conversations with Metro to talk about integration of the system. So we're looking at this in a number of ways, and the language requires, we're going to require the vendors to integrate with the other systems as well. What we're really looking at is making sure that the memberships work together, and that we don't require individuals who have membership in one program have to have membership in another program, that there be some sort of reciprocity within the membership as part of the discussion, as well as, at the worst case scenario, is making sure that they have kiosks next to each other. So if we could not get the hardware to integrate, although my understanding is Bike Nation is talking to all the cities that I've mentioned as well, and in addition, the city of Long Beach has actually enacted a contract with Bike Nation since we've gone forward with this motion, so they are actually going to use Bike Nation. But as easy as somebody slipping a kiosk in, tabbing their card in, and pulling another bike out at the city limit. So we've had discussions about all those things. We know integration is key for all of our success, and Bike Nation, the vendor we're working with now, seems amenable to those.
Great, thank you.
Great, okay, we have one public comment card, so you could just move to the side.
Well, may I jump in? I think the department has some amendments to their recommendation. Some of them are technical, others are substantive. If they could quickly go through that, so we have that on the record.
So we got the whole picture, sure.
Thank you. So we've recommended some changes to the language in our checklist that is listed in your package on page 1 and 2 of the bike share package. We're suggesting that the language that talks about the distance of the siding in the second box under bike share providers, we're actually going to change that from meters to quarter of a mile and half of a mile, just for easier understanding and to expand the range a little bit. So we've actually changed that. We've also added a section on revenue sharing. The original motion discussed revenue sharing, and I did leave that out in the draft of the MOU, so we've added new language on revenue sharing, and that would read, bike share vendor agrees to share a minimum of 10% of the gross of all revenue, income, receipts, and other consideration received for the operation of bike share in the public right-of-way, including but not limited to advertisement and sponsorship, membership, and rentals, proceeds from temporary uses. Revenue sharing will begin 2 years after the project has been implemented and is operating in the system. So we give bike share or whatever vendor 2 years to establish a program, and then we start talking about revenue sharing at 10% to come back to the city. We are also talking about, in Section 3.3 of the MOU, is replacing the advertising language. The Board of Public Works and the Department of Public Works, Bureaus of Engineering, and very particularly the Bureau of Street Services, has been very cautious about making sure that this does not interfere with the city's current contract on advertising and advertising revenue, and they have recommended this new language replace Section 3.3 of the MOU. The new language would read, advertising in the public rights-of-way is subject to regulation by the Department of Public Works, Bureau of Street Services, and must meet the conditions of the Los Angeles Municipal Code 67.02. Under no circumstances shall the bike share vendor use its non-moving property within the public rights-of-way for any type of commercial advertising. In compliance with the LA Muni Code sections 87.5 through and 87.54, advertising on moving property will require that the advertising be painted or decaled on the body of the bicycle. Failure of the bike share vendor to observe the noted advertising sections restrictions shall result in the termination of this agreement and require the immediate removal of all bike share vendors' equipment from the public right-of-way. We have a couple of other small changes besides that, including something within the maintenance that we further define the area that the bike share operator is required to maintain, and include language that says any equipment and space related to the bike share operation be kept free from debris and graffiti. And then the others are just basic housekeeping items, some typos and things like that. And you should know that the flow chart as well as the transmittal are just placeholders. We will develop very specific flow charts and transmittal instructions specific to bike share, but the ones that are in the package now are placeholders.
We have a
And
card.
public comment?
Luis Mata?
Michelle.
Here he is.
Michelle.
I just had some brief comments,
Your name for the
Councilman.
record, Mike.
I'm sorry?
Your name for the record.
Oh, Luis Mata, I'm ADA Coordinator, Department of Disability, City of Los Angeles. I just wanted to attest that I am continuing to work with Michelle on this particular issue. We have future meetings regarding the bike project. The second thing, I have a concern regarding, it's really appropriate when you see ADA language that contractors can check off and read that they have to adhere to ADA language. And another thing is, like Councilman Labange said, is to understand what ADA is all about. And I'm here to let you know that I stand ready to assist any contractor with the City of Los Angeles to work with them so that they can understand what it means to check that little list that says ADA compliance. And because it's very important that from the very beginning, especially in planning, that we're involved in anything that will impact or any program that ADA has an impact on their development and on any future contractual obligations that they make with private entities in the City of LA. So I thank you, and I just wanted to make those comments.
Well, I appreciate your comments. Keep us on that point as you are.
Yes, sir.
And I will continue as well, from my perspective, to do the same thing.
Thank you,
Totally agree
Councilman.
with you. Any comments, colleagues? Please, Mr. Weaver.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for helping us ushering these items through today's committee, also the Public Works Committee and the Department of Transportation, several bureaus, and the comments we've heard today. Today, Lisa Sarno from the Mayor's Office has been very helpful, and I think this is a great step forward in making this, providing people with alternative forms of transportation in the City of Los Angeles. We've heard a lot about these programs in other cities, their successes, and it took us some while to get it to where we want it to be, but we want to make sure we did it right. And it's going to be a learning process. We're going to go out there, do it, and see what we can do to fix whatever we put out there, but I think we're doing it the right way. We were careful in how we did it, and we want to make sure that we abide by ADA and keep in mind and respect other forms of transportation, but at the same time make this available to a number of people who've been asking for such a program in a long time. So there's a lot of people to thank, and I think we're going to get there as soon as this gets to council and make this a reality. Thank you.
Any other comments, colleagues, about this? So tell us, Mayor, exactly what we're doing now.
Okay, if you would approve item number 8, which is the draft ordinance to implement the program. And then for item number 9, you'd approve the recommendations 1 through 5 as amended, and then receive and file recommendation number 6.
Okay, on 8, 9, do we have unanimous support, colleagues? Everybody agree with that? Everybody disagree? Unanimous. Thank you very much for the presentations, and Mr. Weezer, for your leadership downtown on the issue.
Thank you.
What's next?
That would bring us back to item number 6, which is the CAO report relative to establishing Measure R local return programming priorities.
Yeah. Please note Mr. Weezer is leaving, and he's saying thank you because he's happy. Okay, please, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. David Harana with the Office of the CAO. Before you have two reports, one from our office and one from the Department of Transportation. The reports recommend that the council consider
What item is this?
item number 6.
Okay.
The reports recommend that the council and the mayor consider establishing programming priorities for Measure R. The department has a list of recommended programming priorities, as do we. They differ. However, the important thing from our perspective is that the council and mayor give some consideration to how we're going to distribute Measure R funds as we move forward. In addition to recommending that the council consider establishing programming priorities, we also are recommending that those priorities be used to determine future budgetary allocations. And for example, if you establish a list of priorities 1 through 10, that when there, in the years when there are not enough Measure R funds, we would start cutting from the bottom of those priority lists. The department has, for your information, included a spreadsheet showing their forecast and how the Measure R funds are expected to come in. And the general manager is here as well to answer questions. I'm available to answer questions for you if you have any.
Okay, we got different priorities, is that correct?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
If you like, I can go over them for you.
Transportation priorities, I want to hear your priorities, and I'd like to see how we feel as a group with those priorities. Okay, have you given us your priorities?
I have not.
Give it to us first, so that the department can react, respond. And colleagues, I'm considering this sort of like a debate among them, and we're learning and asking the question. Feel free to ask any question you want as you hear this discussion going forward. Okay.
The priorities that we would recommend, number 1 priority would be debt service if you choose to issue.
What page are you on your report?
I'm sorry, it would page 3 of our report.
Page 3 of your report, okay? Okay, number 1, you got debt service, streetcar operations if needed, bicycle, okay, take it.
Yes. If you choose to issue debt using Measure R, then debt service would be number 1. You have not made that decision yet, but we have heard some discussion through the halls of City Hall about this issue, so we decided to put this on the list. Number 2 would be streetcar operations, which you have voted on in the last 45 days. If the streetcar is fully funded and if it receives the requested grant funds from the federal government and you accept those grant funds, there will be significant legal mandates that we will have to comply with in the funding of the streetcar. And number 3 would be bicycle and pedestrian funding, which you as a council have clearly established as a priority for funding for Measure R. And we've heard you, and I think the budgetary allocations through Measure R in recent years have reflected that. Number 4 would be the pavement preservation program, which has received a significant amount of funding and set-asides in recent years and is currently under discussion through your Public Works Committee. Number 5 would be administrative costs required by DOT to support and Measure R programs. And number 6 would be other public safety capital projects for road repair. And just to be clear, Mr. Parks, I'm sorry we did not include alleys in there, but that would be where we would recommend alleys be. Number 7 would be transit capital funding, which is also known as the 3% local match or the Mayor's 3010 program, America Fast Forward Initiative. That would be the match requirement for the Metro regional projects. And number 8 would be median island maintenance, which you have previously funded through Measure R. Number 9 would be transportation planning. And then number 10, front funding for signal synchronization construction, which is pretty much already done. So it's a very minor priority from our side.
10. Okay, the Department of Transportation, where are your 10? What page?
Hi, Jaime De La Vega, DOT. Actually, I think for sake of discussion, I think I'll refer to David's report, so we're on the talk about the same numbers.
That's good.
The 2 major differences, one is on number 5, the administrative costs. Our report had those costs prioritized lower based on prior council direction stipulating that Measure R funds should be used primarily for one-time capital costs. But the more important issue is on the CAO number 7 on page 4, which is the transit capital funding. It's our understanding from Metro and the Federal Transit Administration, and also based on my experience in my prior capacity in the mayor's office, that it is essential that the council demonstrate the funding commitment for these Metro rail and busway projects, that prioritizing it further down on the list, that's okay from a council perspective, but I think that that would show less of a commitment from the City of Los Angeles in partially funding the metro projects, and that's why that was the number one recommendation for the use of funds in the DOT report.
Number one, was there 7 transit capital?
Yes, that's correct.
Can you explain why? That's
Because the Federal Transit Administration, in reviewing Metro's application for grant funding, wants to make sure that there is sufficient money to build and operate those projects. And Metro's capital construction budget depends on the city's 3% contribution. Therefore, DOT recommends that that be the first priority. So if we were to amend the CAO report to reflect DOT's perspective, you'd actually go to page 5 of their report, and you would amend their report to place recommendation 1G, and you would place that between 1A and 1B. And that would make it consistent with our recommendation. And then just an administrative note, I think, for the committee and the clerk, I think DOT should submit the schedule approved by the council for the streetcar operation formally to attach to this item, because the allocation of funds are slightly different based on the prior council action.
I'd like to have both real quickly, and everybody, of course, jump in. Mr. Koretz and then Mr. Parks and then the rest.
Yeah, I would agree with prioritizing the match for Metro's construction projects. I think we do have to show that priority. I would probably rate median island maintenance a little higher, because if we're not able to fund that, we saw the somewhat disastrous results of 4-foot, 5-foot high weeds and a certain amount of embarrassment in the community. I also think the pavement preservation program will be of higher priority, because I understand we're not going to be able to keep all the funding sources from that we currently enjoy. And I didn't quite understand item number 6. Is alley money going to wind up coming in that category?
Okay. To answer your question directly, item number 6 is kind of a catch-all, but it reflects the other capital projects that we need to do to maintain our roadway system, not just pavement preservation. And where you find those budget most notably is in your capital expenditure program in the budget. There are things like retaining walls. When earth moves and falls into the roadway, we have to build a retaining wall, or bulkhead construction. When we have hillsides where roads are falling down, we have to support them with bulkheads. Sinkhole repair, seismic bridge strengthening, we put alleys in the same category in terms of prioritization.
So does that enable us to put a little more funding into alley repair? Because I think that's probably the roadway arena where we do the worst job, and I constantly get complaints about alleys that look like they belong in third world countries, and you would think that would be an exaggeration until you drive on them.
Right.
And they look like meteors have struck them, and they're a couple feet deep, and clearly if an unsuspecting driver goes more than a couple miles an hour would pay for it with a new axle.
We completely agree with you. All these are very important priorities for the city. One of the criteria that we used in our prioritization was whether it was legally required or not, and whether there were some other public safety issues that we would be facing. It's very difficult to separate out some of these priorities. And to be clear, we don't have a problem with Mr. De La Vega's recommendation of moving transit capital if you so choose. Because these items are all very important to the city, there aren't any really hard and fast lines that we would draw on this. We have an opinion, obviously, but other than debt service being number one, if you choose to issue debt, I think everything else is pretty much open.
And obviously, as I said before, I agree that whatever we can do to show that our major transit projects are a high priority, not only because they are, but because that will obviously help us in our efforts to obtain funding elsewhere. And I think we obviously want to keep moving in that direction as we make substantial progress. So.
Yeah, we agree. The only reason it's so far down on our list is because it's under our understanding we are currently not under a legal requirement to provide that money, although we do want to continue to be good partners with Metro and provide money for that. It's just currently there's no legal requirement for us to do so.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mr. Parks. Oh, go ahead.
Councilman, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to comment on sort of the policy framework here. If the council decides to move forward on a version of either recommendation, what that will mean is that the CAO, the various departments, including DOT, and the mayor's budget team, in preparing each year's proposed budget, would have to conform with the council-adopted policy. You, as a council, would still retain ultimate discretion during your deliberations to change the priorities, program the money differently on a fiscal year basis. So this sets a broad framework for how staff prepares the recommended budget, but the council would always retain policy discretion in the event there was a fiscal emergency or a change in priorities. You could still do that during the budget process or amend this policy at a later date.
You know, one thing I was wondering in that, on the very first one, that although it looks like we're speculating or whether someone has some insight, the mayor's budget is going to have some debt issues, it seems to me that we would not be setting as a priority speculation about that debt, and particularly if we're talking about $14 million a year. And what I thought we did a while back was that when we talked about the Measure R, it was going to be the type of thing that you can get stuff fixed every year and that you wouldn't string it out and one day you're here saying Prop C and A, we've overspent and we got to cut back. And if you look at the downtown streetcar and the debt for about 4 or 5 years, you're going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of about $20-some million of your funds tied up in it. And what is the amount for Measure R a year?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely correct about the council policy and the basis for it. We recommended and you approved a policy that at least 9% of the funds should be set aside for capital projects and one-time costs, not ongoing administrative costs, so we wouldn't end up in the same place where A and C are. However, you recently set that policy aside in approving the streetcar operations because that would have...
Some people set it aside.
Okay. the council, sir, as a body.
Majority of the council.
Majority of the council, thank you. And debt service would be a discussion you'd have to have as to whether that would fit your policy or not, whether you wanted to issue bonds or not. The $14 million that you're referencing was, I think, in a memo from the Public Resources Advisory Group on what was possible in terms of debt issuance and debt service, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you would have to lock yourself into a debt service payment of $14 million.
So all I'm saying is that being it is speculative, it's unclear to me why it would be top priority when it could or couldn't happen. If it happens, then it would appear you're going to revise your priorities and say we decided to go out and get a couple $100 million. For today, if that's not the plan, then it just seems to me that why would we put it as number one? And the other thing I'd have a concern with is that we're 3 months or 42 days or whatever from a new administration. They may not choose to lock down $250 million of Measure R as of July 1st. And so that's another thing as to evaluating as to we're close to basically gearing down, and this is, unless someone knows this is actually going to be in the budget, it just appears you wouldn't set priorities on speculation to me. And so that's my concern on there. The other one is that, and although there was some discussion earlier about alley repair, we always get into the same box that alley repair kind of says the alley's been paved and now we want to fix it again. But you still have somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 miles of alleys that are dirt have never been paved.
I thought we were down to about 17 or so.
Well, depends. Depends on if you talk to street services. They'll say 17, and then they'll throw in another category and say, we paved some, and we still call them unimproved because we didn't do the engineering to make sure the water flows. So we just put some asphalt over some dirt. So I don't know why we did that, because why would we go get a dirt alley, put some asphalt in it, and it's still doing the same thing that the dirt alley was doing, but it has asphalt. So why they wouldn't engineer it and make sure the water flowed and all the things that dirt alleys do, now we have asphalt alleys doing it. So the 17 is dirt alleys, but there's an unknown number of alleys and miles that are considered paved, but not improved. And that's a terminology that only street services understands.
Okay.
So that's a key that we thought we were at 80-some miles and we're fixing them, but we found out somewhere in the mix, their fix was a partial fix. So at some point, somebody's going to have to go in those alleys at some point and engineer them so the water runs off and there's not puddling and all that other stuff. But the bulk of those are south of the Santa Monica Freeway. The unimproved and the 17 or whatever miles that are dirt. And yet we are saying, well, we can put money away for fixing alleys that already been fixed. And so and then, for years, we had street services telling us they couldn't use this money or gas tax money in dirt alleys. And you said, why? And they said, well, it's for streets, and alley's not a street. I mean, so we've had all these reasons why not to fix these issues, and when the final analysis, we have a certain part of the city that has significant amount of dirt alleys that create all the problems that dirt alleys create, and yet there's nothing. We're saying let's repair those we already repaired. And I would think, I'm guessing, I would think that the ones that they call unimproved are not going to be in the category of repair because they're not engineered.
Yeah, I don't know about that. We'd have to talk with them and find out.
Those are things that we need to kind of, in my mind, resolve and have a plan. At one time, we had an organized plan to get rid of the dirt alleys, and as we were applauding each other and high-fiving, they said, oh, by the way, those are unimproved. And nobody had ever heard that discussion during the whole time we were funding getting alleys fixed. So if we can figure that out, and so that alleys are treated the same, that we have communities in the city that has paved alleys, and when they're paved, they have a right to be repaved, but to have this distinction of dirt, unimproved, paved, and then the money goes to the paved alleys for repair, is basically, I think,
all right, we will talk to street services and help better define that issue.
But that term we just heard in the last year or so, unimproved. And so the other thing I'd ask is that, and I don't know if the 3% fits this, but we mentioned when the council was approving the downtown streetcar, that would appear, at least at this time with the Crenshaw line going forward, that they have basically built a box on Crenshaw and Vernon for the potential of a station there. And what they've told the community, we could only do a station if the bids come in far enough below to invest in a station. If they can't get the bids down low enough, there'll be a box there, and the train will whiz past Lemert Park without any consideration of a stop. So you go from, I believe, King to like 52nd or something like that. So we have a motion, and Maria, thank you for being so quick to put on this during council, to ask that that station be plugged into that, either the 3% or, because I don't know what would be a better definition. The MTA is putting $1 billion line between Exposition and the airport. And the city has no expense. In fact, we're getting paid for the work we do. So that it appears that if we're going to use Measure R as is intended, that, and I'm not saying that we take them off the hook in the sense of this funding and say, here's $40 million, no matter what your bids are. I think we have to be smart about it and figure out what their bids are, and basically whatever funds we make available, it's on a retro, we pay it in reimbursement so that they do the work and we pay them back once we verify it. But I think we need to find a way, other than telling the community that the line will be, the station will be there only if the bids come. And now the bids came the first time, they were so high, they've now gone and rebid it. So the likelihood of having the station there is coming less and less. So that's, and we're kind of going backwards in the fact that we want to accelerate everything. MTA was here earlier talking about accelerating, but with the rebidding and some of the difficulties we're having in the sense of moving forward, this line may slow down, which doesn't help us in getting better bids and saving money. But I'd ask that we, and I think if I've read it properly, the 3% would be the area of dealing with matching funds or whatever, that we would look to fund a portion or all of that, whatever the eventual cost is, and not leave that part of the community without a station there.
Please go respond to them, Mr. Kretz.
Councilman Parks, the recommended programming covers the city's 3% match for the current scope of all the metro projects, so that does not include the Lamert Park Station.
No.
So if you took out funding from the number 7 in the CAO report, for that purpose, we would not have enough funds to fully meet the city's contribution.
The city's funds is already dedicated or that we've committed to.
Yeah, if you approve this report, all those transit funds are spoken for.
Well, the thing is that I'm just looking for a way to plug the station in, and again, it says 300 million for the 3%. You're talking, somewhere about less than, 10% of what's already committed? If that station was paid in total, my expectation is that if the funds come in lower, it's going to be a lower cost. But they're going to build a box. We just need to figure out how can we use some funds to make sure it's completed when they're building it, rather than going back retroactively in 10 years and say, okay, let's fix the box, under the street. So I'm just asking.
I think you have to look at what the uncommitted balance is after the council action on the streetcar, and it's probably going to be in the 300 million range over the 30-year period. It's premature to commit a specific dollar amount, in my opinion, because we don't know what the bids look like at Metro.
But I think the issue is on the streetcar, the dilemma there is the bulk of what we're committing to, over 300 million, is for operational.
That's correct.
And so, and we even took somewhat of an unprecedented step by saying, even though Measure R runs out 7 years before, we're going to fund it for 30. And so the key is that this is something I think that we're making those kinds of judgments on, and as we know, operational expenses are probably that and fuel are the two things you can never project accurately. It's one thing, and what we're looking at for Lamert Park, it's a one-time cost. Once you know the cost, they build it, you don't have a 30-year funding, and the MTA is going to fund the operational cost of the line once it's done. So to me, it appears that if we have funding available or funding's there, we need to figure out a way to make that station occur in the sense of the city's as an obligation, rather than turn our back on Lamert Park, View Park, High Park, and say you either got to get it on King or 52nd Street, and particularly when we know that Lamert Park, that small patch of ground, is one of the most active facilities and business communities in our city. So I just ask that we find a way to do that with that motion, and I'll just give you the CF number so make it easy to find, 13-0278. But that's something that it just seems like if we're going to talk about dealing with these issues, and we certainly don't want to take the 3% money from other committed projects, but within whatever amount of dollars, what is it? Is it 60 million a year that we expect from Measure R?
It's approximately 40 million a year.
40 million? Somewhere within $40 million over the life of this project is 3 or 4 years before they start construction or getting it done, that we find $30 to $40 million to make that station a reality.
And let me just say this, because I know Mr. Brett's going to jump in. I'm going to say two things. I support 100% a station in Lamart Park. Have since day one. Totally agree with Mr. Parks. I also want to stop in Westchester. It hits the ground level there. We have areas we've looked at. It's a no-brainer if you want to go to the airport and not schlep there in a shuttle. You get there by getting on the Crenshaw line, stop right there in Westchester. You want to go downtown? You want to go to the NFL? You want to do whatever else goes on downtown? by it stopping in Westchester, you get the dramatic Westchester input. So I support Mr. Parks. I would assume he's going to support me, that we're going to fight for both Lumet Park and forestation in Westchester. And I'd like that included in those money options and flexibilities and so on and so forth. Mr. Collins.
I just wanted to address alleys, just because my at least anecdotal observation is that in my district and throughout the city, it would appear that most of the alleys that aren't dirt alleys are not engineered alleys. They're alleys where we spread some asphalt over them, and 20 years later, they now have a number of deep potholes where you can see the dirt, and they're probably more dangerous to cars in many cases than were they not improved at all and they were remaining dirt alleys. So how do we get to the point where we're able to repair all of those, even in the most basic way? And is there any way where we can improve many of them? The improved alleys in my district are almost all the ones that were done by developers. So they do a project, there's one nice alley that's engineered properly with the cement down the middle for water flow. Most of them are in terrible condition. So do we have any plan for how we address that?
Well, the answer, I think, to your question lies in the cost of the alleys and the available funding. And it's just a matter of priorities. Do we go in and we do alleys first, or do we do streets? We have a significant number of failed streets, as we've talked about in the past. We have alleys that are in terrible condition, and we don't have enough money to go around to do all of them at once. So it'll just be a matter of establishing priorities.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a way to look at the actual traffic flow and where the routes are, because in some cases there are, at least in my district, there are certainly alleys that are more likely to be used relatively heavily as alternative routes than there are streets. There's some streets that are in bad shape, but they get very little traffic.
Right.
So I wonder if it's worth doing that kind of analysis throughout the city and looking at alleys that are actually critical in terms of traffic flow and trying to identify the most critical ones in each district and get those up to snuff somehow.
It's possible to do, sir. The question I would pose for you is that a higher priority or equal priority to fixing the failed streets that we have?
If I were given the choice of fixing 5 blocks of streets or fixing the 5 worst alleys in my district, I might pick the alleys if I were given that choice, because some of them are actually in some critical spots. I mean, we have repaired 1 or 2 alleys in that particular condition, not the full-fledged repair, but enough to get by for another 5 or 10 years. And it actually has helped traffic flow in a couple places like Westwood Boulevard.
Yeah, I know Mr. LaBonge can do it, but I agree with Mr. Kretz. I have the same problem, obviously, because, it's like water knows a way to get around.
Sure.
So do people in their cars. And in both his district and mine, that's all they do is figure every side street, every alleyway, every backup something because of the gridlock. So this is obviously a combination of Paul and mine.
Yeah.
And please.
Yeah.
One thing on alleys too is that I think if you go out and wander through the street, every alley at one time was part of the transportation system. Mm-hmm. The reason people don't use them is that we stop fixing them, cleaning them, and they're filled up with trash or something. And when you go through different parts of the city, some of the alleys may be wider and paved. In my district, they're dirt and they're narrow because the lots are narrow, but that's where people no longer get to use often the garages that are at the back of their residence. And so the alley becomes basically overgrown and it becomes a rodent location, and people just don't use it because there's tires and whatever. But the key is they were all invented as part of the transportation system, and once they were overgrown, nobody uses them. You can't get through there. But the key is if we go through there, I don't know if there needs a study, they all need to be fixed because there's a health problem in many of them.
Mr. LaBonge.
I think you work with each individual council person. I think you look at it regionally on this issue of alleys. Number one, the CAO's office, I've asked, but I didn't get an answer. I want to buy a cement plant Water and weight is what destroys the street. If you have a concrete pad down the center of alley, the water will then find its way through the concrete to the street system and not destroy the alley. The alleys that Paul has spoken about, you could call 847-3333 and ask Nazario to trade out. I've traded out asphalt paving for concrete work. You could do that. 847-3333, Nazario Salcido. And then also, I would just say, I want to know this question too. There's a lot of paper streets, there's a lot of alleys, and I remember the time in the alleys when they first started, and even in public stairs, where we abandoned them, where we fenced them off, etc. This was the rage in the late 70s. I think we should do a separate study on alleys, okay? And then one suggestion I do have, Mr. Koretz, I would support, because they used to take every dollar that went into the operation of parking meters, every extra dollar went to buy off-street parking lots, which is no more. All the money's taken by the general fund. I would support either a percentage going to alley improvements that are there. Because one thing now, they were never for the transit system. It was just for convenience to the property. They never were for through traffic, but they were for delivery. You know, back then, people, and because of crime, a lot of stuff came out to the front of the streets. Back doors used to be open. People would deliver the shop. Oh, Charlie, just bring it on in. Now things are locked up there. I would look to, if they want to take a percentage in a certain zone with alleys, let's say on Beverly Boulevard between La Brea and Fairfax, because there's an alley system there, that a certain percentage of the meter money gained goes directly for alley improvement on a 50-50 basis. Alleys are a property improvement. They're not a city responsibility, but I think we could come up with want to come up with a pilot program, a fourth and a fifth?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so let us do a thing.
The 11th.
Well, let's start the fourth and fifth.
It's as serious in my
know.
district as it is in Paul's
You
district.
got to start somewhere, and you already admitted, Mr. Rosendahl, and no disrespect, I gave 180 days. I'm just saying for the carryover, let us start with one area with a pilot program and a 50-50 on alley improvement.
Totally for it, but I will argue with you.
Here's the thing, give us a street to do. Give us a street that could be defined. No, give us a defined area. Give a defined area that we can look at it. Also, Mr. De La Vega, for your experience and long service to the city, is there taxation on a paper street, or is it seen as city property? The question is, if we get rid of a lot of paper streets, and the property owner doesn't want to pay to get rid of a paper street because the planning department that thinks it wants to combine with the building department to be more efficient, they want to charge like $20,000 to get rid of a paper street. A paper street is a street that you think is going to be a street one day. And there's a lot in my district. Do you have any paper streets, Billy?
I sure do.
Yeah, if you get rid of them, then you turn it back to the property owner. And we used to either burn trash in the backyard or have it collect by garbage, what they call garbage collection now. Now the trucks are much bigger, so it's difficult to go down the narrow lots. I think you got to look at it differently. So I think it would be a good thing, Maria, if we could come up with an alley motion and separate this totally, move on this here, make it up to the council person of the district right now, because I think it's defined projects, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
in the last 40 minutes that we've talked about alley, I think we could have fixed 2.5 alleys instead of talking about it. But I think for what you have in that book and listed, it does not include alleys, correct?
No. My recommendation did not speak to alleys. The CAO.
Got it. But I think we should, not in the CAO either. So I think this is a very important issue. So I think we should talk to Maria, come up with a motion, and look at alleys separately, and also for options that on the pavement. If you want to take a street like Surrey Seal, if you get rid of Surrey Seal and do some alleys, it helps. And the other thing too, we got to remember that the transformation of the business district is business. There's more FedEx, there's more jump in, jump out. If they go to the back, then they're not parallel parking, they're not slowing down traffic, they're making it easier. So,
Good point. Now, Maria, take a deep breath and tell us what we're approving here, unless you wanted to add something.
Just
more.
a point of clarification on jurisdiction. I think, Councilman Labange, you'd want to ask Public Works, the CAO and CLA, and I'm happy to help.
I was trying to include you, Jaime. I'm trying this
I'd
age
have to help.
of trying to get together.
No, I'm
You guys
here
were
to help.
talking about it. I just tried to be. We'll do a separate motion.
I think that's great. Thank you, Tom, for that. So what do we have before us right now, please?
Well, you have the CAO's recommendations. What I heard in the discussion so far was the change on page 5 of the first recommendation, the A through J would be changed to debt service being the first one, G moving up transit capital as the second priority, then B, C, D, H, E, F, I, and J.
So nothing's been taken out?
Nothing was taken out from what I heard, but that's...
And there's flexibility.
That would be the framework that would go forward, what I just described, unless you want to make some other changes to that.
I was distracted there. What did we do on, so you can deal with alleys separately, or were they going to
Well,
go
that's
into
up to you.
number 6?
It is part of F, the capital program, as the CAO articulated. If you wanted to pull that out as a separate priority, that certainly is up to you.
Again, if, and we've struggled with this for a number of years, the only way that I think we can actually solve the alley problem is go to full range of alleys. But the minute we say repaving, it just knocks dirt alleys completely out. And then the minute you go to fixing the dirt alleys, then you get the unimproved alleys. And so we really need to have a definition that says, when we say alleys, we mean all of them get fixed some way. Right now, there's 3 different types, and repaving means only certain districts get the benefit.
So we have that clearly on the record?
Well, did you want to pull that out as alley improvement as like a K, a new...
Can we amend it and add it into the CAO's report?
Yes, you can change however you want
I
to do
think we
that.
should do it separately, Mr. Parks.
If it goes separately, it generally is separate. And I think the issue, we're trying to deal with the money and all these priorities as part of Measure R. It seems like we should send it as a package. Otherwise, whoever replaces me in 2 years will still be talking to you about.
I understand that, but I just think there's so many multiple issues. Let me ask you a question, Mr. Parks. In the 8th District, are there any people who would like to vacate the alley and get their property back? Because the property of the alley was not the city's property, but when they developed it, we required it. That was the planning scheme at the time. So if they vacate it, they could go back to the property owner. And maybe some people like that to use for their another 10 feet of backyard or whatever they have.
I think the dilemma we ran into for folks that considered that, yes, there's some that said yes, but then you get into the expense that now who's going to build the wall between you and your neighbor?
But also,
Yes.
alley has always been a property owner's improvement, not a city improvement, except in a CRA zone or a special community. Oh, Mr. Hernandez has great history.
I just want to share with you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, for the record, in South Los Angeles, the 8th, 9th District, alleys basically were part of the streetscape when the city was developed in the general plan. So your grids tend to be smaller, your blocks are smaller, and alleys are used for emergency services. So whenever we're going through processes of closing alleys for schools, for example, we have a whole issue of trying to provide access for emergency response in terms of fires and so forth, because those alleys were the way to get to those homes in the back. And so it's been a much more difficult issue in closing alleys for that purpose and vacating them. It's an issue we deal with almost every development project that comes in the South LA area.
On the commercial, but on the residential, in the southern part of the city, there's a lot of residential tracts that do have alleys.
But what I'm trying to explain is the alleys go right behind the residential abuts the commercial. And
I forget the commercial residential, I'm talking about residential, but that's why it's such an interesting issue that we could. And even in some cities, they've re-energized their alleys in commercial. Pasadena has a tremendous alley system for...
And Councilman, I understand it wholeheartedly. That's why we had a situation where you had a disparity of which alleys were improved versus which ones weren't improved, and which ones were being serviced and which ones weren't. And it's because South Los Angeles was built in a different era, and the alleys were used for a whole different purpose. They were
I understand that, but I don't think we have everybody here. The city engineer's not here. I would not support taking money out of this or any which way to do that. I would support it in the Finance Committee when it comes together, because this report's already drafted.
I think when we first started looking at alleys, to clearly show how the city dealt with them, 80% of the 80 miles of alleys 5 years ago was in 3 or 4 districts. It's pretty clear that they were abandoned. And so we can keep pulling it out and readjusting, or we can fix them. And so if 80% of the dirt alleys were in the 1st, the 8th, 9th, and the north part of the 15th, that tells you that the city found a way not to fix the dirt alleys. And invariably, everyone said we don't use gas tax money for dirt alleys. And we have no money otherwise. So that's the whole issue, is either we're going to fix them or we can keep separating them and put them aside and then later find out that there was no money and we still have 17 plus miles of dirt alley in 2013. So that's what we're saying, is that the only way I think this gets fixed is to keep it as part of this report and add the word, the whole range of definition of alley, as opposed to separating a certain kind of alley. Because otherwise, we're going to keep going down a path of repaving those who are fortunate enough to have paving and ignoring those who's never got to paving.
Well, let me ask you a question. When you use the word abandon, what do you mean abandon?
They never fixed them.
Abandon is official term of the Bureau of...
I don't know about that. I'm just...
Well, let me tell you what it is. Let me tell you what it is. I understand that. But if they're abandoned alleys, Mr. Parks, that means it's no longer under the jurisdiction of the city.
No, you're missing my point.
No, then they're not abandoned. I'm trying to help the question. Are they? You used the term abandoned.
I did. They were abandoned. They were ignored.
Well, no, they were ignored. Abandoned is a term that they use. When you abandon an alley, that means the city revokes.
No, that's your
right.
definition.
It's the City of Engineering. It's the Bureau of Engineering. Don't say it's mine. I'm trying to help you.
No, you're not trying to help me because you don't understand what I'm saying.
Well, no, when you use the word abandon, that is not the word.
Engineer. I'm talking about from the community. They were abandoned. They were never fixed.
Well, I would just suggest that maybe Mr. Hernandez could help, because the deputy for your office, on that phrase. If we want to try to find a way to try to get alleys paved, it would be a choice of the pie that each of us get for street improvements, sidewalks, or whatever the case may be. But when we say we abandon alleys, that does mean that we've walked away from. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct, Mr. City Attorney. So if we have another thing, if we want to, and they may have never been paved in the first place.
That's why they call them dirt.
Okay, then that was done by the developer at the time, and they're the requirements of the city. Just like there's many streets in the valley that have no curbs or gutters because the developers, the city wanted to house it after the war. So I think this is why it's so important that we get it right in the inclusive issue on alleys.
Yeah. Well, I think getting it right after 100 years is to pave the alleys. And I think the other issue that we're into is all those technical terms we hear today is the reasons the alleys aren't fixed. We couldn't spend gas tax money on dirt alleys because they weren't streets. All of those are the technical terms that prevented the work to be done, and the community views they've been abandoned because they've never been fixed. And to have 80% of the 80 miles in 4 districts is a clear indication that the city chose not to emphasize fixing alleys in certain parts of the city. So we're just saying we need a definition that show alleys across the board so that we don't have 3 different types of alleys, and that they're in the mix, so that if there's money allocated per district, a council member can say, fix my 3 alleys and 2 streets. But we can't keep going down a path where go find the money for dirt alleys. We only have money to fix your streets. That's what the problem we're trying to solve. And for those that don't have dirt alleys, I can understand them not having that understanding.
So may I ask, based on that, Mr. Parks, where would you prioritize?
I would just say in that category that you've identified on the repair, what is that, the
Capital Program for Road Repair. F.
program, that you give a full definition of the word alley.
Okay.
That we
can do.
We fix the alleys that are paved, and we reconstruct those that are dirt. And we go back and find out what the unimproved meant, and how do we put the center divider of concrete that doesn't cause the water to make the asphalt go away. And if we separate it out of this report, it gets lost, and it gets in committee, and it never finds its way.
Okay, we can work with the city clerk to make that adjustment as it moves forward.
All right, let me ask one other suggestion. If I can ask, Maria, maybe you could help me on this. Mr. Rosendahl brought up the issue of I don't know exactly where it is, but the Westchester Station. I don't know if they have an EIR on it, or I know they did the EIR on.
Okay, I guess it was cleared through the...
Could you do us a favor and look at, I think the above ground station in Westchester is something like a $10 or $12 million deal. the 15, the one in the Merck Park, they're going to build a box. It's a matter of like a $40 million as a matching deal. If we could look at how you might come up with a issue on the funding and bond against some of the money to pay towards that as a city project, because we're investing in $1 billion+ project that then ties to a $2 billion line called the Expo line that then takes you downtown to guide to the Blue Line. So with all that connection and getting to the airport, it would appear if we could find a way to find some money, it would be helpful in a way to, rather than just taking it flat out, we can bond, find a way to where those two realities for two communities can become a reality when they come back with the plan.
Okay, we'll work with them. We'll get the numbers.
I could not have been more articulate than that. And to the lobbyists in the room who are here for the item that they're interested in, this was democracy at its best. We went into an open discussion here. You all got to see how we truly operate as a democracy. And now we will make a decision. Please read what we have as a group before us to vote on.
We have the CAO's recommendations as amended to include the definition of alleys and the inclusion, clearly articulated, full definition of alleys in the capital program, which is F. We also had a recommendation to add the council-adopted funding for the streetcar as part of this report. I'm not 100% sure I know where you are on the priorities here. Did the letters that I read out and the changes, was there support for that?
For me, it was.
The one thing I wasn't clear on is we've given a little feedback on areas that we consider the highest priority. Do we need to be specific, or can you take the gist of the guidance you got from us and reprioritize this list?
We would prefer you be specific if you can be.
Well, the repriority that I heard was debt service stays as the first one. Transit capital, the matching gets moved up to number 2. Then it would be the streetcar operations. Then bike and ped funding. Then the pavement preservation program. Then the median island maintenance. Then the administrative costs. Then the capital program. And transportation planning, and then the front funding.
And did we say we were going to create an 11th category for alleys? I wasn't clear on.
That was the number 7.
Definition. Oh, we're just leaving it in as.
We're keeping it in the capital program, but clearly articulating alley and the definition.
A definition, what is an alley, or who's responsible for an alley?
David said he had that covered.
No, as I understand it, the capital program definition will include not only repaving alleys or repairing alleys, but also paving dirt alleys. Reconstruction.
Would that include concrete?
Whichever is needed,
Would that include concrete?
if that's needed.
A Class A alley has concrete down the middle, so the water goes down the middle to prevent the erosion or weight. Weight and water kill pavement. So this is the question. I just say we should have a definition of what is the alley and what is the improvement, required.
That would include it if the Department of Public Works deems it's necessary.
What we've seen on alleys when they do them properly, they have asphalt in the middle of them for drain. What we found when they don't do them properly, they put asphalt in them and they erode and they call them unimproved.
You mean cement in the middle for the drain?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That's what an improved alley is. You pave it and you put drainage in it. If you don't put drainage, then you just put asphalt and say we paved it.
Last comment.
Yeah, perhaps on F as it relates to alley, you can just say something more generic, such as any alley improvement, repair, and/or new construction, and that way it covers every possible engineering solution. And then you can have a subsequent debate as you program the money year by year about what is being built with that money.
You did it.
Sounds fine with me.
Okay, Mr. Labange?
We're okay. And what's the question? One real quick question. Would you look up a story on buses that are made to look like streetcars and their success. There's a rage in the United States of streetcars, and I'm sorry Mr. Weezer is not here, but before we broke ground on any track, you have long buses now, they look like a streetcar, they're open air, they're something, but look at that and just inform the committee chair.
Yes, sir.
Thanks. And the members.
All right, so.
Approved
give us
as
the
amended?
last instruction so I can vote.
Approved as amended, as we've described with those three changes.
Mr. Parks. Mr. Prince. Aye.
Yes.
Lapine. And myself. Unanimous among the committee. Let's go forthwith with getting that stuff moving in the right direction.
Thank you.
Quick. Okay, could we have the issue framed? Oh, I'm sorry. What do we have left on the agenda?
We have item number 7, which is an LADOT report relative to contract with Hertz On Demand for car-sharing services in the city of LA for a term of 5 years ending June 30th, 2018.
Okay, that's a big deal. Now, where are we on the remaining items on the agenda?
We have an item 11, and that's it.
What about
10 we're going to continue. I'd recommend you continue that. We're still working with staff.
We take 10 and continue it, and number 11, which is England and Rosenthal, sent for 4 months, approve a 3-month extension, which is
Recommend approve.
recommended. So just repeat it again for them to hear.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so that we continued item 10, and we will approve item 11. That brings us to item 7, which is the car share report and
Are we all agreed with
DOTs.
that on 10 and 11?
Were we still on 7?
We're continuing.
Did we get to 7?
Continuing 10, yes. We're working with staff to get some clarification on that.
No, but number 7, we're going to go through.
We haven't done 7 yet.
No, that's the last one on the agenda. That's what all the lobbyists are here. Okay, all right. So, are we done except for the item?
Consent.
For item 7? We're done.
No, 7, item 7.
Yeah, other
Yeah.
than item.
On
Other than
10, do you know what 10 is?
Yeah,
Continue.
it's just that 10 to continue it for 30 days.
Well, the reason...
Explain why, go ahead.
Okay, this is to ask, Water and Power needs to do infrastructure work. Right now, they have some limitations on that. I want to make sure that we look at the feasibility of an option for street construction moratorium for them, because it's big work that they sit. They're not working. When they sit, they are being paid, but they're not working. To look at there's ways to, if it's an inbound, that they're allowed to work. So basically, I'd like to ask if we could move this forward and have the department study and report back to committee in 30 days because we do have a restriction on peak hour construction. But there's some big infrastructure that's not getting built as fast as it should that has a longer impact. Right now, there's an infrastructure on Los Feliz, and we require DOT, DWP to hire DOT, which has made it work because of your skills, and they go from 10 to 6, which is into the peak hour of the afternoon. So I'm just bringing this to the attention because we're going to have a lot of infrastructure. All I would ask the committee, send it to Mr. De La Vega, study it, and report back in 30 days on what we could do. And a further amendment to that they co-locate DOT staff with DWP staff on the engineering plans on street improvements so they don't miss a day or two, which means a lot in a construction project on trying to work out lanes. You understand what I'm saying? Your people work shoulder to shoulder now, but I want them to work in the same room. That's a thought. Just come back with that.
The way the heads are nodding, we'll consider it a friendly motion. It'll be part of them.
Very well.
Okay? All right. All those in favor of where we are? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it unanimous. You have your instructions from us on that. Now we're going to go into the issue that a lot of people in the room want to hear. And it is item number 7. Tell us what this is all about. And most importantly, I'm sure those who didn't get accepted want to know why Hertz got it and not them.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jaime De La Vega, DOT. I'm going to introduce Executive Officer Dietrich Allen and Tamara Martin from my staff, and they're going to handle the item. Introduce, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Dee Allen, the Executive Officer of Transportation, not Environmental Affairs. And I wanted to give you just an overview of the program and run you through the recommendations. And we have Tamara who can give you the specifics on the program. Coming from an environmental background, I'm really excited about the car share program that the city is about to embark on. It is an opportunity to reduce pollution, to look at reducing the vehicle miles traveled in the city, to even provide an alternative for car ownership. And all of that is good for the city of Los Angeles. We have gone with a RFP. There was a pilot program that happened in 2009 where we looked at certain areas in the city as to whether car share would really work. As a result of that pilot program, the council instructed DOT to go out with an RFP to select a vendor to provide citywide car share program in the city of Los Angeles. We're coming before you today with a recommendation about who that vendor should be. We went through the process and it's outlined in the report. So what we would like for you to do today is to adopt a policy that supports car share in the city, to allow the general manager to execute a 5-year contract with Hertz today, and to authorize us to execute the contract per the approval of our legal staff. So Tamara can give you a little bit more information, details about the program, or I can stop now if you want specific questions about it. We can just go into answering your questions.
Go for it.
Okay. The RFP...
Name the record.
Oh, I'm sorry. Tamara Martin, LADOT, Parking Permits Division. This went out for an RFP last year. We had put it out initially as a final draft to for peer review in the car sharing community. And we did get some comments, some questions, and did some modifications before the RFP went out.
How much time frame was in that period when the draft RFP was out, and they got all a chance to interact and so on?
The draft RFP went out February 3rd of last year. There was a 2-week period within which we received comments, questions, and some commentary from 2 potential bidders. One of which was Zipcar, the other one was Enterprise Holdings, but they did not subsequently apply for the RFP. Zipcar did. The RFP was finalized, and it was final draft was presented to this committee and to council in March of last year. It recommended a sole provider or a single provider because part of what we were asking for was staff. A staff liaison to spend 50% of the time in our office to provide support for the program. And we initially received some feedback that if it was a multiple provider, obviously there were concerns about data and confidentiality. The RFP was subsequently released in May of last year, and interviews were conducted in October, and I think October and, when did the other one go forward?
Maybe December, 1st of November, I think. So in that October, November timeframe is where we had the interviews and did the short list with regard to the RFP.
Ultimately, the recommendation was to go with the sole provider of Hertz, who has a great presence in the area, a number of on-demand locations already, which could support the program best. They also provided or recommended the best revenue sharing for the city and the best compensation package to recover our costs.
And are they black and white, the 3 put in front of you? Were there 2 bidders at the end?
There were 2 bidders at the end.
And who were they?
There were Zipcar and Hertz.
There were initially submitting in response to the RFP was Hertz, Zipcar, and Car2Go. Car2Go was rejected for further evaluation because they didn't meet some of the basic requirements in getting information in on timely. So then the committee was left with going with the two and evaluating the two.
Car2Go here, any representatives from that group? Did you feel, I just want to know, would you want to respond to that if you give it a chance or not, or whatever?
For the record, Bill, say.
Yeah, for the record, Bill, say.
Use that microphone.
It's not necessary at this time. I mean, there's a technical fault on our part in the business inclusion.
Well, could you come up and just say it on the record so we have that officially? It helps us, in our own internal discussion, we're just trying to do the right thing. Your name for the record and so on.
Walter Rosencrantz with Car2Go. And we understand that we were disqualified because we did not meet the requirements under the business inclusion outreach portion of the purchasing requirements of the city.
Colleagues, any questions?
What does that mean in English?
There you go.
Means he's an honest guy. Tell him he failed the test.
Well, the way we understood the business inclusion outreach program is that you're required to conduct outreach to various categories of businesses that are predetermined and predefined by the Department of Transportation as part of the RFP, whether they're applicable to your business model or not. So it was not understood by Car2Go at that time that, for example, automotive dealerships. There was a requirement to reach out to 7 automotive dealerships. However, our program, we are a subsidiary of Daimler. We use the Smart Car exclusively for the program, so there's only one dealership that we could do any business within the city. So we didn't do outreach to 7 dealerships because we could not possibly do business with those dealerships. So our understanding is at least that was the reason for our disqualification. My understanding is that we did submit everything in on time. It was just that we did not meet that requirement of outreach to the specific number of businesses that were required as part of the business inclusion program.
And that's only related to the auto dealers, or are there other businesses?
There were other categories, travel agencies, and that. Again, we have our own internal systems for that.
Appreciate your candor on all that, too. Yeah, do you want to add anything?
I just appreciate his honesty.
Me too. Scratch, yeah.
Actually, on that one, it really sounds like the misses were possibly irrelevant to the actual issue of who would do the better job in servicing us. So I don't know how we want to look at that. The other question I was going to ask is, did we look at Zipcar and the fact that they were sort of the pioneer in L.A.? Yeah, I don't have any more questions for you.
Thank you very much for coming up, too. And as Mr. Labange said, we appreciate your honesty.
Second question on the other company, and then maybe you can answer both of these. Does Zipcar get any credit for sort of being the pioneer in L.A. and in the Westwood area, and putting together a program, and then for us to be able to follow that up and creating our own?
Mr. Chair, can I go back to the first question on the business inclusion ordinance? And just to be clear, the department always follows council-adopted policy. That inclusion element is a council mandate, so we included that in the RFP, and we administered the procurement in that way. The strategy of us circulating the RFP in advance is to give any interested parties the opportunity to review the requirements, whether they're administrative, by council and or the department, or if they're policy or operational, so that those entities can comment. If they think that the structure of our draft RFP limits competition, we would then bring that sort of discussion back to you and say, is the council willing to waive business inclusion for this procurement? We did not hear from any of the potential bidders that that was a concern at the time. That's why we administered the council-adopted policy on business inclusion, and that's why that proposer was disqualified. It doesn't speak to their capacity to provide the services. It only speaks to lack of compliance with the council-adopted policy.
If I could, the zip line represented here in the room.
Zipcar is here too.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, zip line, that's it. You're on Venice Beach, Billy. He's on the beach.
Venice Beach,
Yeah.
cleaning the garbage cans. Please, good afternoon. Introduce yourself to us.
My name is Jeff Shields. I'm the general manager for Zipcar in Los Angeles.
Okay. I mean, for the record, I want you to know I've been very partial for Zipline. Through Alex Fay, who had started with me and then worked through that process. So you guys are great.
Thank you.
We just want you to know that. How do you respond to what you're hearing said at the table?
I feel like we put forth a very competitive RFP. Obviously, we've been doing this for a while. We are, as you stated, the pioneers of this. My background goes back all the way to, I was previous to Zipcar. I worked at the University of Southern California and actually brought Zipcar to USC back in 2005. And so I had worked in some of those initial pilots that we put together between UCLA and USC in the city. And I feel like we put forth our best foot forward. It looks like, based on reports I've seen, it really comes down to what the bidders were willing to pay for the parking and with the revenue share, perhaps a little more so than history and performance and things of that. But again, it was a process. We followed it. We had our opportunity to interview for it, and that's kind of where we're at. So, I mean, we've enjoyed working with the city. We have no plans on leaving LA. We've grown. We opened the doors last December. We've grown substantially over the last year, and we plan to continue to stay here and grow our membership base and offer car sharing to the LA region.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Chris.
What do we know? Thank you. I just have a question about the third vendor. What do we know about their history? How long have they been involved with this particular approach? Obviously, we know Hertz for a million years as an
I have
entity.
Hertz representatives here, and they could speak to that specifically business model if you would like.
Yeah, how long have they been involved in this, and how
Before
is
Avis.
their program?
Let me just.
Only
Can I
two
ask you
people.
one question? Before Hertz, can I get one question?
Please.
From your
And do they
comments,
try harder? That's
For
the
her.
question.
yeah, from your comments, it doesn't appear you're protesting the outcome, but you're disappointed in it. Or
I'm disappointed. I'm certainly not protesting it.
Protest,
I mean,
okay.
I'm not a sore loser by any stretch. It's just, but am I disappointed? Absolutely. Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
absolutely.
That was probably the best question of the whole group here. Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
I'm not going to protest. Okay. You're up. How'd you guys get it? Come on.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hertz began car sharing in, Edward Cruz with the Hertz Corporation.
Great.
Marcus Suma, Hertz Corporation.
Great.
Hertz entered into the car sharing in 2008 and currently servicing cities like New York, Washington, D.C., San Antonio, Miami, and just most recently awarded Santa Monica area. With Hertz's size and whether it's the worldwide presence in the different countries, it's definitely an area that we feel that we have the biggest opportunity. As far as Los Angeles and the way we see Los Angeles, it's an area that I have 60 locations that service the local market today, and looking to add another 52 within the next 45 days with the current program. So as far as fleet sizing and the way that we forecasted our business, our goal was to have 200 cars with the technology in the units by the first 90 days. At this time, we've already reached a 2,000 mark of vehicles equipped with the technology to do the car sharing.
Let me ask you this. If somebody abandons their car because they want to get to a plane, they don't care, they leave it somewhere, and we ticket it, do you go after those people and get them to pay the ticket? Or who's responsible for that ticket? We would like you to be responsible, ultimately. Would you be? Is that part of the discussion we've had? Or anybody bring that issue up?
I can answer that question. So ultimately, we would be responsible being the owner of the vehicle. However, we would definitely go after the renter that originally picked up that car.
But let me just add, in our negotiations, that Hertz would be responsible for the ticket, and we've explicitly explained that in the contract with them.
They have to go after it. and
They would have to
be
do
able
it, but they would
we're
have to
taking
be,
care of it.
yes.
Please, colleagues, any questions?
No, I just wanted to ask, because I think it's important that in the future, because this is and I really it's for staff, but thank you, Hertz, for that. And where do you guys live?
I live in Carlsbad.
Carlsbad?
Yeah, San Diego.
California, good, okay, good. I'd like to know, I would want to not impede the city's ability to retain the right to create operator-neutral car-sharing programs. Is this an exclusive only to this contract? Or can we get a right in case something else gets developed? Does this impede any other vehicle from being shared, whether it's a Vespa motor scooter or whether it's another type of vehicle? How are we looking at this?
I do not think that going forward with this proposal will preclude another car share company coming into the city. However, the requirements and the agreement that we have with Hertz will be followed. And so if another car share company comes in, they would be subject to all the municipal codes and rules that are on the books now, unless it's sort of negotiated as a part of that agreement. But I do not think that this precludes that opportunity for having someone to come in. And maybe Mike could help me
As long
with
as
that, because we've talked about it.
Yeah, as long as it wouldn't impair the contract that we would have if council approves the Hertz contract. You don't want to do anything that would harm.
I got it, but this is a draft motion, Counselor.
Yeah, the problem with the draft motion is that you're moving to amend the award itself.
Okay, I don't want to do that, so what do? Change the word. Move to what?
Well,
Move to request the department that on any corresponding contractual agreement, that it make it clear that the city retains its right. I mean, I don't want to touch the contract, because the contract's probably there, but just move to request the department that in the future, any corresponding contract agreement, make it clear the city retains right. What do you think, Jaime?
Mr. Labange, I think I would suggest that if the committee wanted to, you would direct the department to report back on how we would treat other potential car share operators in the city. I think that would be the direction. And then just want to clarify, we presented this RFP to the council as an exclusive, and that's what we procured this as. So, the recommendation is that Hertz has an exclusive right to be the car share operator for LA. They're going to co-brand and put marketing resources in logo, naming, etc., to make sure that this is a City of LA car share program. Obviously, Hertz is the private sector partner, but it is a city program, and the primary benefit they're getting is we are going to provide on-street parking spaces as well as public off-street parking spaces as they need to place their cars in the different neighborhoods.
Let me ask the technical question.
Yeah.
So let's look at Largemont. You know Largemont. What are you going to do there? What will you want to do there?
I don't know exactly. Part of the contract negotiations is we're going to be talking to Hertz about where is the market demand. They identified in the RFP.
But I mean, would you propose taking 2 spaces or 22 spaces?
I would say it's going to be more in the range of 1 to 2 per block. And I think that's also the reason we want to do an exclusive is, even though we've had a very good experience with Zipcar, other cities have had positive experiences with Hertz, Zipcar, and other providers. What we don't want to have is a situation where we have 20 or 30 service providers all asking for 1 space on the block. What
if they don't ask for any space? Like, let's say they don't want to just share.
We won't. You mean if Hertz doesn't, or if anybody?
No, the next one, or someone comes along and there's a newfangled vehicle. I'm just looking to the future.
I guess theoretically they could operate the service as long as they complied with all municipal and state parking laws.
Right.
So that would mean if they had a business model where they might leave the car for 2-3 hours and the parking time limit was 2 hours, they would be subject to enforcement.
I got
also, that. In the exclusive, there may be situations where Hertz will be able to place cars in parking districts, preferential parking districts, neighborhoods where there are currently oversized or overnight restrictions with permission from DOT, and also reimbursing the city for any costs for lost meter revenue, et cetera. So that's part of the business.
That's the question then. I'm going to have you look at this, and when the time we go to council, if the city attorney approves it, a softer version that doesn't mess the award up, but gives the vision an opportunity to still be there for new and non-required parking spaces for that. You know, what doesn't entail you that there maybe something comes along. I just don't want you to be boxed into a corner. Sometimes I think we've hurt ourselves in the way we've done taxis because we're so exclusive in some areas there. There's some people that say competition is great, and no one knows it better than Hertz because they're number one. And so that's what I would do. If that's okay, Mr. Chair.
I got no problem.
And I'll work with Maria, we'll kick it around, and we'll soften it so it's legal.
You got Mr. Parker wanting to speak.
Yeah, and my last point on, the benefit of having the exclusive is we're also trying to provide clarity to the customer about where they go if they want to participate in the city's car share program. And Hertz has proposed having a fleet of 1,000 cars on the street within 5 years. I would assume they're not going to promise, but they'll put more cars on if the business model works.
And this is a 5-year contract. This is fairly new, even with Zipcar, even though we did the pilot program. You'll have enough time within that 5 years to work out the problem and then move forward. We're going to see where the bugs are.
That's correct.
I just want to make sure I'm clear. When the RFP went out and it's exclusive, that then puts us in some jeopardy if you change the language after making the selection.
That's correct.
That's correct.
That's correct.
For 5 years, Hertz is the only program in the city of LA.
It's the official program of the city of LA. They're going to co-brand, so they'll be essentially the city service for car sharing, and they will have the privilege of parking on public streets where there are municipal parking regulations, and so they'd be able to avoid time limits, but in exchange they would compensate us for lost revenue.
But the other side is there's no legal, unofficial program.
That's correct. But like, for example, Zipcar just came here. If they're operating and not seeking any special parking exception from the council or the department, that's just another venture.
And then there are other car share in New York. I know Zipcar's in New York, and most of their spaces are private spaces, so they negotiate with private entities as well.
In a hotel lot or
Yes.
something like that.
Yeah, or apartment buildings.
That does not harm the exclusive.
No.
That's correct.
And that's what you don't want to do. You do
So
not
Hertz
want
is
to
getting the advantage of the visibility of having the on-street presence for the program.
That's the key. Okay, thank you.
Please.
Just a question on Larchmont, Hertz Zipcar, or whatever the title of forgive me, Zip, Hertz, what do you call it?
Well,
how do you call this car? What do you call it?
Hertz on demand.
Hertz on demand. So they're parked on Larchmont, it's a 2-hour limit. Do they have to put money in the meter?
No, they're not going to, no.
So, but next to you, someone puts money in the meter and they get a ticket, but this car doesn't. What defines that? How do they see that? People are very smart in the street, so they say, why is that car not getting? Is there going to be a bumper sticker on it, or how are you going to do that, and how does that work? I don't know. That's not something the city attorney would approve, because I've seen that where people get very, I don't know how, I know your car's bad, but here they're very knowledgeable on the streets and the meters, and it is very...
I'm not sure how the department had planned to do that, whether they're going to have placards in the car or whether there'll be signs posted.
Council member, in the past, what we have done is there have been designated spaces. They've been designated out by signage.
So this will be only that for this awardee.
Yes.
So no one else could park in there.
Right, and typically...
That makes me better, because then it shows, will there be some identification on the car?
Yeah, that's what we're going to work on with Hertz, is the actual branding of how the car's going to look.
Big picture of the city hall and...
Maybe Councilman Labange.
No, Mr. Rosendahl, I think your smile. He's got a better smile.
Oh, I don't know about that. Everybody's great around.
Hertz had to open almost anything.
It's a unanimous feeling among the group.
Can I ask, we have 2 reports on file, DOT, if we can receive and file the March 21st report and then approve the March 26th report.
So be it. So will be done. For the record, we have made a decision, and the meeting is now over.
Thank you. Thank you.
And while the clapping is going on, the meeting is over. Let's turn off the sign, the noise over there.